Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. My name is José Montelongo. We're delighted to see here fellows and former fellows and parents of former fellows and people from the Brown community and JCB staff. Thank you for spending part of your Friday afternoon with us. My name is José Montelongo. I am curator of Latin American books, and it is my pleasure today to moderate a conversation between Dr. Gwendolyn Collaço and Dr. Karin Wulf, who have both recently curated exhibitions. Dr. Collaço at the John Hay Library and Dr. Wulf right here in the Maury Bromsen Bolivar room of the John Carter Brown Library. Gwendolyn Collaço is the Anne S.K. Brown Curator for Military and Society. She joined Brown Libraries almost 2 years ago after working with collections at MIT, LACMA, and the University of Pennsylvania. I highly recommend that you catch her current exhibition. You will see some images about it here, which closes on May 29th. It is titled Fashioning Insurrection. Don't wait until the last day, only 2 months left. In addition to books and broadsides and magazines, Fashioning Insurrection includes watercolors, a stunning oil painting, a portrait of a Brown alum, and a costume by a contemporary designer, which made me think maybe this event should have been a red carpet gala type of thing. Maybe we'll think about it for another occasion. If you want to see sartorial translations from military uniforms into fashion, this is the exhibit for you. Karin Wulf is director and librarian of the JCB. She's also professor of history at Brown University. Her latest book, published last year by Oxford University Press, is titled Lineage, Genealogy and the Power of Connection in 18th Century British America. Kathleen Telling, our postdoc of 2026 or 2026 program coordinator, co-curated this exhibit with Dr. Wulf, but she could not be here today for this conversation. She sends her regards and wishes she could participate. 7076 Across the Americas, the exhibition that you can all visit today right here at the JCB, will be open throughout this calendar year. In this exhibition, publications of local and regional consequence are juxtaposed with those of imperial, national, and international significance and tell the story of the year 1776 across the Americas through the JCB's remarkable collections. So without further ado, I have a few questions prepared, and we will have also time for questions and answers with you at the end. 30 or 40 minutes of conversation and then 10 minutes for Q&A. I'm gonna start first with our guest, Gwendolyn. The question is for both. Most exhibitions start with a large number of objects and also a large number of possible ideas. How did you arrive at the central theme for your exhibit? Please tell us about the process of narrowing down, which became the aha, this is what my exhibit is about.
Well, thank you for the wonderful introduction, Jose, and to answer your question. So the initial development for this exhibit, Fashioning Insurrection from Imperial Resistance to American Orientalisms, occurred right when I got to the Hay. So for me, it started off with the entire collection because I was quite literally just trying to get to know what was in it. And I knew from the beginning when I started that this event was coming up, around 2026, and I wanted to do something that would be a little bit unexpected. I think everyone expects us to bring out the American Revolution material, which is wonderful, and I do encourage people to see it. But there's so much in the collections, and especially the ASKB military collection, that people do not know about. And in particular, that's the non-Western material. And I realized that if I was focusing on revolutions, why not focus on revolutions outside the United States? And it just so happens we have 3 big ones that occurred right after, well, very closely following the American Revolution. And I realized, well, why not look instead at how international or global revolutions shaped the US through the circulation of media, material, and people, rather than just telling the story about how the American Revolution is its own kind of singular event, because it didn't exist in a vacuum. And I think also the United States, as it was forming its identity, did not exist in a vacuum. So for me, I think it was important to look at how the US as a very young nation was trying to establish an identity on the international stage.
Fantastic. I said in the beginning, colorful and stunning exhibition, but mostly surprising. When I went there, I was like, what? I would have never thought of military uniforms influencing fashion and the way people dress, and how they supported a foreign insurrection by using, Greek attire and organizing a party and then having a publication about it. Thank you so much. We'll continue talking about it, and we have more opportunities to go dive into some objects. But first, Karin, how did you and Katie narrow down your subject?
Well, thank you, first of all. And it's so great to have Gwen here, and so great to have these exhibits in conversation. I'll just say, I know all of you know this, but I'm going to say it anyway, that Brown 2026 is a university-wide initiative to commemorate the origins of the United States in the moment of revolution, in particular the Declaration of Independence in 1776, but also, of course, to think about the role of research and teaching universities in and for democracy. And I'm really honored to co-chair that steering committee. And part of what we're trying to do is think about exactly what we're doing here, which is how we generate knowledge and how universities, in fact, are unique spaces for generating and sharing knowledge, in our case, about the kind of wider context of revolution. So here I'm also wearing my hat at the JCB, and the origins of this exhibit, I think, are a little bit different in the sense that Gwen was talking about, like, approaching this enormous and fantastic collection and thinking about making sense of it, whereas we really started with a concept and an idea, and that was that the JCB's commitment to 2026 really tracks along kind of 3 themes, which reflect our strengths as a particular kind of institution and some of our intellectual and community service commitments. And those 3 kind of themes, one is about the kind of global context of revolution. That is one. The JCB sits in, obviously, Providence, Rhode Island, in what was British America, but collects across the hemisphere and always has, and wanted to reflect that hemispheric context. So this exhibit really came out of that first pillar of our approach to 2026. Right from the start of pitching that kind of 3-pronged approach, one is about origins of revolution, or foundations of revolution, foundations of democracy, and foundations of historical knowledge. And in each one, we're talking about the revolution itself. We're talking about the context for historical knowledge and how libraries make knowledge. And our 3rd pillar is about foundations of democracy, and we focus on freedom of religion in that one. Anyway, so foundations of revolution here, talking hemispherically, right from the start when I pitched that to the board in 2023, I think, and said we need to go big on 2026. This is a really important moment, a really important opportunity to think and speak publicly about our strengths and our commitments as an institution. The exhibit, was a kind of obvious outcome for that particular pillar of, our hemispheric context. And that 1776 across the Americas was a theme, like, from the very beginning. And also, it's an exhibit that has been deeply collaborative right from the beginning. All exhibits are so collaborative, and I know we'll get a chance to talk about that, but from cataloging and digitization to conservation and collaboration and conversation with fellows and curators, not just between Katie and myself, but one of the first sets of conversations I had was with former fellows, writing to them and asking them, saying, look, the concept for this exhibit is going to be 1776 across the Americas. It's going to be identifying from among the approximately 1,000 items in the JCB's collection that are currently cataloged and online that are dated to 1776. Tell me what you think would be interesting here. Former fellows had a lot to say, and some of them committed to writing about that and to suggesting things. And then Katie joined us in the summer after we had started kind of gathering that material, and had the energy and expertise and perspicacity to take that kind of fire hose of information and start thinking about, like, what are the things we know need to be in the exhibit, and how can it really represent the kind of the full kind of scope of how the JCB represents the early Americas. So it was the reverse of collection to concept. It was concept to collections, in a sense, for us.
Because I kind of love that you brought up the collaboration element, especially because this exhibit is not just a part of Brown 2026, yes. It's also a research initiative at the Center for Middle Eastern Studies. So as you might be able to tell, all of the insurrections we're following are all from the Islamicate world. And so for them, we're looking at this through the lens of American Islamic exchanges. And I think especially when it comes to like our duty to our different communities, this is a moment that I think is significant for Islamic communities across the US and the world. And especially now, I think that this is an event that kind of acknowledges those communities in America's history from the start. And I think we're not the only ones doing this. This is also happening, for instance, at New York Public Library, where they just put on an exhibit about New York and the early American immigrants to the country there. And also in Massachusetts, the Arab American National Museum just did a multi-site exhibit on immigrants from the Middle East to this country in its earliest days. So, for us, the collaboration kind of came after, as we were kind of thinking about how we would situate this exhibit. Oh, I think you have just, John, but you can switch.
It says it's on. It says it's on.
Oh, yes,
it is on. Sometimes it takes a minute. It has to adjust. I don't know. Anyway, I know Jose actually has questions for us, but we're like, we're just going to go, right? Exactly.
We can throw out the script. Really.
But part of what I love about that, like, collaboration with the Center for Modern Middle East Studies is that, that again is like a perfect Brown 2026 expression, right? Because it's like, what can we do at universities? We have people with so many forms of creative, energetic, and urgently important expertise, and to come together and develop like new ways of expressing knowledge, that is like the potency of the university right there. So yeah, we could just mic drop right there.
No more questions.
That sounds fantastic. Let's drink. No. We can talk a little bit. My second question was connected to the 2026 Brown initiative, but I think Karin has, unless there's something you want to add on that, we could close on that if you want to, on the more contemporary, and then right now dive into certain objects in each exhibition. What do you think?
Well,
Karin?
I feel like there's never enough to say about Brown 2026, so alas, I'm going to say no, you can... I'm sure we'll find a way to bring it back.
Yes. So let me now ask you simply, if you had to choose one object that embodies the stories and the complexities of the exhibition, impossible task, but let's say you have to choose one, which one would you choose and why?
Okay. I feel like I'm cheating because this particular image was on the front of the program for the American Islamic Exchanges Symposium. It is a shawl from the Anne Murray Brown Symposium that was purchased by the Brown family. And to me, it was perfect because it tied together each region that we were talking about in this particular exhibit. So the shawl itself, it's a cashmere shawl, so made in India. It was almost certainly exported first to an Ottoman trade depot like Smyrna or Istanbul before it was shipped by American merchants in the region to the US as a luxury good. And so to me, I was like, oh, perfect. This particular work combines all these regions in terms of where it likely landed and then was worn on a member of the Brown family's person. And then for me, it also ended up kind of providing a different metaphor for the US than I had encountered before. I've never really been happy with the metaphors of like melting pot or palimpsest for many reasons. Like one to me is like a homogenizing process. The other, palimpsest, is like layering, but the other layers are not always as visible as you would like. But when you think about a shawl, particularly like a cashmere shawl, that it's loom work, so threads interwoven, it's embroidery, so additional labor and design being added on top while the base is still visible, and then also piecework, elements that are brought together that may not have been intended originally to come together, but nonetheless have been put together in a beautiful way that does celebrate those distinctions. I think that can make to me a metaphor I'm more comfortable with, especially because if you think of a way a shawl is worn, you drape it, you see it from all different angles. And so you don't just get the top layer as most visible, it's something that allows you to get more of a full dimensional view of the elements within it.
Fantastic. When you think of the shawl, that's when I was thinking of the possible gala missed opportunity. Next time. Karin, which one would you choose?
Well, I mean, I have to say, like, one thing that is remarkable about your exhibit is just, well, first of all, the visuals are so stunning, as we see just like representations there, but also just the materials are so three-dimensional. And we always say that, you know, books and paper are three-dimensional too. They are not flat, they are not just text, they have, you know, dimensionality. But there is something about putting a body inside of the object that you have displayed that is very different. Like there's something so evocative about that. So of course we asked Katie too what her favorite object of the exhibit is, and I'm not sure I have a favorite per se, but certainly the one that she chose is really poignant, which is that it's a smallpox certificate from 1776. It's signed in October of 1776 from Nicholas Brown, and it's a certificate for Nicholas Brown and his children to be able to leave the smallpox hospital, showing they'd been inoculated and they were free from contagion. And it's not the only smallpox certificate that we have, not even from the Brown family in the collection. But it's certainly poignant in all these different dimensions. One, it's the body, right? That is like, it instantly makes you, if you know anything about smallpox and what a terrible, terrible disease it was, and how not just disfiguring, but intensely painful, and how it reshaped people's bodies. And that even the inoculation itself was so, such a visceral, embodied experience that is just a deeply unpleasant thing. And that they were doing it in that moment because George Washington had just, semi-grudgingly actually, he was kind of a pill about it, not to mix medical metaphors, but kind of dragged his feet a little bit. But, you know, all military in this period and through the First World War, more casualties were from illness than from injury. Combat injury, and he recognized the threat of smallpox and finally agreed to inoculation of the troops. So this kind of effort to inoculate represents a kind of broader recognition and commitment to communal health, which is obviously something that really resonates for us now. And then I guess just last, to the point of dimensionality, it invokes the body and the sense of it, but when you look at this little piece of paper, it is just a little piece of paper. It's got these kind of scraggly edges, and the writing on it is kind of rushed, but it's a printed form, which means that the printer, John Carter in this case, created a printed form to fill out. I mean, for many of us, we remember the COVID card, you know, and that you would get the COVID card and then that somebody would handwrite in, usually yourself, or at least in my case, I filled in myself, the date at which, and that I got Moderna, you know, vaccine, and on the date and so on. And it's enormously evocative to see this printed form, this small printed form, then with manuscript filling in the names and dates of the people who had been committed to this particular form of community health practice.
Fantastic. Great to think about the embodiment of the shawl and of course of the vaccine. It's not the first exhibition where we have smallpox connected things in that first case. We often see the finished, the polished product, but the path to opening day is very rarely a straight line. So setting aside tasks, indispensable ones, like meeting the many deadlines to keep a project of this nature moving and preservation and mounting, what was the most significant problem-solving moment for you in this exhibition? Tell us about a specific obstacle, intellectual or physical or even narrative, that you had to deal with.
I have something that covers all of those areas. And it has to do with a very particular Z-shaped wall that goes through the gallery. So if you go in there, you'll realize that the space has actually been divided a bit, but not in necessarily a way you would expect. This Z-shaped wall along its long end has two windows in it, one that's a semicircular arch that you would find in the Mediterranean. The other is a pointed arch with a lattice that you would find in India, Mughal India at the time. And there were so many discussions about whether or not we should put this in, also too how to make it fit accessibility and fire safety requirements, but also this question of like, what is it doing for the exhibit? For me, there were numerous reasons. One, I mean, in terms of the conversations that could be had with the material, it was a way for me to actually create some sight lines for the exhibit, especially with the different windows that were incorporated. For example, the window that has a semicircular arch at the top is actually what you see in both Greece and on the opposite side of the Mediterranean in Algeria. And so that section actually completely like looks across the way, and you get to see, for example, different travelers in that region and what they were bringing back. And then with the Indian section that had this like Mughal lattice called a jali, which is, by the way, actually based off of a real jali that is at the Minneapolis Institute of Art, we decided at that point to place the works directly across from each other that would be seen through this screen, this lattice, that were all American adaptations, semi-distorted adaptations of what, how Americans were interpreting all of these different forms of media that were coming from these regions. And it also is what introduces you to the India section of the exhibit. And then finally, there's this aspect of it kind of, the wall ends up, at least I think, encouraging people to walk around rather than just kind of take everything in at once. And I think that's important. I mean, here you have that lovely large case in the middle, which actually does give people like, you know, kind of a direction to navigate, right? But in the gallery at the Hay, without, for instance, like the furniture that was in there before, we don't have that. And then finally, it gave us the chance to include images of works that couldn't be put in the cases, works that were too big for the cases we had, like an Ottoman passport, which a traveler used from our collection, and also to images from other collections, like Library of Congress and also the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. And to me, those filled out parts of the story that our collection could not.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, as you can see, you visit an exhibition. the curator has an entire idea of how the flow and everything. Then you come, I came through the end, and then I realized that the beginning was there. But Gwendolyn and I were talking shop before this talk and saying, yeah, you think of a narrative and then people go see it the way they want to see it, and then they come back and see it in a different way. What about you, Karin? What do you think was the challenge? And it doesn't need to be this, but let me throw something at you, because I remember your discussions with Katie and with other people from the library about whether to have the Declaration of Independence in the center case. And at some point you had decided, no, it will not be there, because then it will... We don't want people to come see the Declaration go. But maybe that's not what you were thinking.
Oh, I was thinking of like the... hours before we open. And by the way, we are still doing some refinements in the exhibit that will all be fully complete in another 2 weeks. We have a copy of the Declaration in there now that it looks to me like a flying squirrel. It's sort of like a giant replica that's like spread eagled, descending on the room. And there'll be more of those, actually. It's going to be great. But I was thinking about 20 minutes before the reception when we opened in late January, and I had a Sharpie and I was coloring white plastic bits on the bottom of the faux tavern lanterns that are hanging in the exhibit, because they were white, and we were like, no, they have to be black, because it was like literally scribbling on them with Sharpie. But maybe that's not what you meant. That was fun. Gianna, you remember that? Yeah, that was fun. But yeah, the question of like whether to center the Declaration of Independence, because the goal was to be about 1776 across the Americas. And I think we knew right from the start that the Declaration and the other piece that's in the center case, which is the map of San Francisco from 1776, from our first kind of feedback session, we knew those would be together. But it was a question of like, center case, no center case. We had that center case built, just 2.5 years ago. We were like, maybe we won't use it. We've got 2 different bonnet sizes for it. There's a whole like discourse around that center case in our one very small room. So, ultimately it felt like centering the Declaration, but pairing it in the center case was going to be the right move, and at least moving people from what they might expect to see in a 1776 exhibit, which was stuff that's very British American, but situating it hyper-locally, like with the smallpox certificate. And we have other Brown family materials from 1776 there, and then moving beyond into a kind of different geography and different context and different materials to show that 1776, it turns out, happens all over the place. Was the kind of right move. So,
just to let people in this a little bit into the rationality of these decisions, if you have the Declaration in a flat case or on the wall, then one of the things that happens is that you cannot see both sides. But for this
you
one,
have to see both sides. Yeah.
Why did you choose that particular? We have more than one copy of the Declaration of Independence. Why that one, Karin?
Yeah. No, it's always great to talk about the Declaration, this copy and our others. Just this afternoon, someone snuck in, and I was like, and there was a kid with them, and anyway, and I was like, well, you want to go see the Declaration? He was like, is it the real one? I'm like, no, it's better, because that one you saw at the archives is like a later Gator Declaration, honestly. It's like from August. So it is. It's from August 76. Like, anyway, this is what really happens in July of 76, is they get printed and circulated and used. And this one, has information on both sides about the guy who held it, wrinkled it, manipulated it, responded to it. You'll see it when you go in there. It was printed in Boston, certainly within a week after July 4th. It's a very early print. And it was owned by a Revolutionary War soldier named Daniel Gould, who writes on, first of all, the great text of the Declaration, when in the course of human events, all that gorgeous stuff is amazing. But the real meat of the Declaration is these 27 grievances against the crown. And it's this long list of like what we're mad about. And some of them are pretty nasty, honestly. That 27th grievance about Indigenous people is not something I'm sure everybody would want to sign on to now or then, frankly. But Daniel Gould went down and numbered each of the grievances. And then at the bottom, he wrote, "I agree, Daniel Gould." It's like he's like his own John Hancock there, basically. And on the reverse side of it, he explains, "I had this declaration when I was a soldier in the army." And so you need both sides of it. So it had to be upright, which meant we needed the tall bonnet, unless you just wanted to flatten completely the experience of it. And seeing both sides of it also lets you see how he folded it, crumpled it, and it's not the precious object of that thing that's in Washington. It is the real Declaration, which is the power of those words that were circulated through casual print in July of 1776.
This is also making me so jealous that you have the tall cases with the removable bonnet, because it allows you to do so much just like this.
Nobody ever is jealous of our exhibit space, so thank you.
No, give it to us.
Thank you, Karin. That's fantastic. We always in this library prefer, from a pristine book, we prefer something that shows how it was read, marked, used. Those are more telling, more important for the historical record and for research. My next question is, starting to think about the afterlife of these exhibits. And here's where maybe we can go back to 2026 if you want, but don't necessarily. Once these items are back in their permanent homes, and some of them are loans on your exhibition, right? We don't have anything loaned on our exhibition, but in Fashioning Insurrection, some of them are going back to RISD, if I'm not mistaken. How do you think this project might inspire people to look at these same collections with fresh eyes, or with a new perspective, or with a different set of questions?
I mean, that's an excellent question. And in some ways you can't predict how a researcher is going to engage with these works, but at the very least, I think by putting materials out there, especially those that have never really been documented, in the case for so many of the works in Fashioning Insurrection, by the way, a lot of these works from North Africa and also India and Greece, some of them were miscatalogued or under-cataloged. And so the process of doing the exhibit automatically makes the material a little bit more discoverable to a researcher, so that even if it does go back to its home in permanent collection storage, actually with the exception of that costume, the outfit from RISD, one of which has been rotated out because it went to New York Fashion Week. And so
it was worn?
It was worn at New York Fashion Week. And so in that case, though, it's a very real representation to me of how historical sources and also this type of media is still being used to inspire fashion today. And, even if another designer or another artist comes through and says, oh, this is something that I could use generatively to create a new piece of artwork, fantastic. Because I don't want to just limit it to researchers. I think that it is just as valuable to have a contemporary artist to reinterpret this material and all of the connotations and weight that it carries. I think the process of making it easier for them to find, whether it's in the afterlife of a exhibit website or in even our catalogs, because all the labels will eventually go into, or at least the online labels will go into the BDR, and some parts will be updated in the Bruno catalog. So, it's all of this helps someone to track it down.
Absolutely. Karin?
Well, so one of the things I was thinking is I know the BDH has written about both of these exhibits, and I would love for them to write about them in combination, and in conversation. That would be really great. Maybe we can ask. No, because I would love to, know what one of these smart young journalists makes of thinking about these themes together and collectively. And sometimes it's just that moment of asking someone a question, can you think about these together? That, you know, really inspires kind of a fresh perspective. I mean, for us, I think there are a variety of things that will happen out of this particular exhibit. You know, obviously, thanks to our fantastic digital team and our cataloging teams, the online exhibit will live on. Also, we've asked some fellows to write essays, and there's a volume in the works of material, not just that's in the exhibit, but also materials from 1776 beyond, that what's in the room. And I think, you know, the JCB's project for 2026 is called 2026 and Beyond for a reason, because we intend for all of the work that we're investing in here to have a kind of intellectual afterlife, but also a kind of community-centered payoff, in a sense. And, you know, there are just so many ways in which thinking hemispherically about these quintessentially British American, United Statesian contexts, which are so important. Good gravy. You can't, I mean, I couldn't be more intense about the promises of the Declaration and the rights-based, legal-based framework of the Constitution. But all of that happens in a context, and it happens often in that period in a context of our nearest neighbors, which is the hemisphere. So I think, you know, in this moment for the JCB, the afterlife of this exhibit is just reiterating endlessly that 1776 is happening across the Americas.
I love those two answers, in that one is from the very broad, the ideals of the Declaration of Independence and its impact across the Americas, and also to the small, which are very, very consequential for a library, cataloging, recataloguing, digitization, discoverability. If that's what happens after we are more than delighted. So with that, I'm going to open the floor for questions, comments, reclamations. And I have one to get us started, which is simply, is there one object you're going to be particularly sad to see go back on its shelf or in its box?
Definitely the album of paintings on mica, which is a type of crystal or quartz that you find in India, because it's a gorgeous work, but also too, every single time it gets moved, I feel like more damage can get done to it, because painting on that surface is incredibly, how do I put it this way? The paint does not stick very well. So after time, it actually starts to flake. So I actually don't even want to move it, or rather, I don't want the conservators to move it. However, at the same time, I think I'm sorry to see it go, because those are not brought out terribly often. And also they're a collection that, even though we have one of the biggest, and I've had to look this up while researching for this exhibit, we have one of the biggest collections of these Indian paintings on mica in the US and most places except for instance, the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. And no one knows about it. And so to me, to put that back away is a very sad moment, but I do adore that work a lot, and that people have gotten to see it over the course of this year.
So if it stays there forever, now you know why.
Thank you for this conversation. I want to follow up on something that you talked about earlier in terms of thinking about how us disobedient visitors use the space. Because there are ways in which you've designed the space for people to follow through in a particular order, but it is not quite as drastic as at some museums. And so there's in some exhibits. So I guess the way to frame the question is, what kinds of steps do you take in designing the exhibit to create order for the disorderly as we wander in whatever direction we want?
Well, I think, I think as Jose or Bertie or anybody here who has worked on an exhibit at the JCB knows, like, we've just got this square room and, we've anchored a center case there, and you hope that people will go in and start on their left and wrap to the right, which is a typical pattern, and we try to lead people with the material that's on the walls. But honestly, it kind of doesn't matter, because I think it's true for the brilliant exhibit that closed before 1776 opened, Elemental, Jose's exhibit. You could take that in order, but you didn't need to. You could actually take a bite in any direction. And I think that's part of our space encourages you to be more of a hyperlinked kind of exhibit. So, the idea is that you start local and you move geographically out from where we are right here in Providence. But honestly, that, I don't even know that anybody experiences it exactly that way. I've seen people walk in and go to the right. I've seen people spin around and see what we thought was the last case. Anyway.
I guess this also, builds upon our conversation earlier, where we have the blessing and the curse of having two entrances to our gallery. And so sometimes people enter, and what I would conceive of as the exit is closest to what is currently the entrance to the Hay. So people now are somewhat going in from the end, but I'm very glad that the very least one thing I was thinking of before we changed where the main entrance to the building is, due to security reasons, every entrance or exit has something that I perceive of at least to be eye-catching to draw folks in. If you enter from the exit, which is the annex section where geographically actually corresponds to India, but what you see at the end of that section is actually the contemporary piece of fashion that a RISD designer brought to us. And so, that's something that hopefully at least draws people into the space. If you go in from the main entrance, yes, you have the giant introductory panel, but also if you look to one side of that wall, you'll actually catch a glimpse of the metal, which is the Rush Hawkins sword, which is on display. And on the other side, the way that we've designed the Z-wall, you actually get a really clear view of the lattice window that's been inserted. So it's kind of like, come on in. And we want people to feel curious enough to kind of wander into the space. And then as they do, hopefully they'll notice that there's a giant oil on canvas portrait of one of our Brown alums in a Greek costume to the right of them. So that's one way we've tried.
Okay. Okay. I took my 13-year-old to the Elemental exhibit, and she proceeded to bounce around like a ping pong ball, like collecting all the different elements and then looking for the oldest thing. So I'll take her to this one and the other and see if she bounces like a ping pong ball and where she goes to. But I want to know about the bullpen of things that did not make it into your exhibit. What were the processes of elimination? What did those look like?
Well, so first of all, I have to say that just again, Katie really did the bulk of the work on the winnowing. We had a feedback session. This is a process that we do here where we get everybody in the library together basically to look at the kind of the first big cut, and then to do a kind of feedback on, what are the choices you've made and how are those things in conversation. And, there's so many folks here so expert in these collections that people will say, oh, you pulled out that, but actually you really want that. I think we've got a map in there of Tobago in 1776 that Bertie, said, oh, you want that one. That would be the right thing. And I was particularly keen on these particular histories that were the William Gordon histories of the Revolution that were like, there's a long correspondence in our collections with Nicholas Brown about, don't you want to invest in my histories? That's a resonant kind of conversation, I think. But so there's literally a volume of stuff that is not in the exhibit is enormous, and I don't think there's anything that wouldn't have fit, like, because the concept was 76 across the Americas. So you'll see the kind of variety in there is extraordinary, and that was kind of the point. One limiting factor was size, actually. So maps. We have amazing maps, and also we have extraordinary prints. And we could have just been, overwhelmed by maps, Revolutionary War era maps. They're incredible. But we thought we would have to shrinky-dink them, which isn't so fun. I mean, we already do have some reproductions on the wall just for size. And some things that are not. You'll see the ones that are originals are in frames, but reproductions are not framed. So size was a limiting factor, which was kind of a bummer. And then our cases themselves are a limiting factor because they are not just shallow this way, but they are actually shallow. They are not deep. So when you want to show, a big chunky volume, you can't show that big chunky volume. Or if you want, a big map or a big print, you've got to then sacrifice some other things. So there is a kind of, algebra of what will fit in the cases. And so the things that were left on the cutting room floor, as it were, are just a gazillion. The good news is you could go on Americana, our website, our digital platform, and search 1776, and you can see just how many things there were.
Yeah, I mean, we had very similar constraints, although, again, without a large, tall case, we had perhaps even more. So I should say, yes, big chunky volumes, but also we have so many gorgeous, what we call 3-size volumes, which when you open them up are roughly this. And then they also need additional height because they need to be cradled. And so basically they end up being way taller.
Darn, Roger.
I know, they're taller than all of the cases. And so we also have shallow cases. And for that reason, we're like, okay, well, we have to make a choice. I guess we can include this as a reproduction or pick something else. And so I think in one case with for instance, Louis Duprez's voyage into Constantinople and Greece, we did reproductions, but then in other cases, we decided not to include volumes simply because even if they could fit in our shallow cases, the book open would have taken up the majority of the case, and one half of it would have been empty because there's a blank half, or for instance, the back of many of these prints are actually blank. And so you can't really display them without sacrificing a lot of case space.
Weirdly, they don't let you layer them.
No, I know. Yeah. It's terrible. And then what else? Yeah, we also had cases where we had, or several works where we had multiple editions of prints. And some were colored, some were not. And in that case, it was like, which one is in the best condition? Which one gets the point across that we're trying to make the best? And for instance, in one case, there were lithographs from the French conquest of Algeria. And I remember we actually ended up going with the black and white version for one of them simply because the actual print itself was clearer than the color version. So it's not always the one that has more necessarily. It's which one actually preserves what you need. And then, yeah, other than that, there are many things we could have put in, and then we just had to say, like, this is just going to be an overstuffed case. And it does not look good when you already have many works next to one another that in some cases might be repeating information. And I think you just have to trust your viewers to be able to derive what you think is most important from these works rather than trying to make the point again and again.
One of my favorite, absolutely very favorite objects that did not make it here is, the iconic image of the American Revolution, which is Paul Revere's image of the so-called Boston Massacre. And, when people write about that, art historians, and they talk about the propagandistic nature of that particular print. It does not represent what happened in that moment. The British were not neatly lined up, and the virtuous victims in Boston were not also lined up on the other side. But we have a print of the Boston Massacre that I think is my absolute favorite of any I've ever seen anywhere. That's obviously an exceptionally rare print, these Revere Boston Massacre prints, but we have one, we have the other one too. But we have one that is offset, like the printing was offset. It was a mistake print. So it is a jagged view. It is disconcerting because you see everything in almost triplicate, and the clouds of gun smoke that are meant to be gun smoke, from the vicious British firing on those poor Bostonians look like clouds, and you're so disoriented by the image. I love that because it actually is a better indication of the kind of chaos of that moment. I love that print so much. But what it would take to put that in the exhibit and then kind of explain that is a bummer. So I regret that because I think it's such a powerful, evocative, telling object. But alas.
Thank you, Karin. I'm not gonna cut the time for questions because Karin is still here, Gwen is still here, but as they say, it is 5 o'clock somewhere. Now it's here. So thank you everybody for coming, and let's keep the conversation